It's business as usual on Deep Space Nine, and we've got an incoming freighter. Nothing special about that, but we're told by the captain that one of the passengers has a chronic medical condition that needs treating, so we teleport him directly to the infirmary. This is new, though. Kira recognises the condition as something caused by an accident at a labour camp she helped free back in the day. Everybody she's ever known who had it came from there, so under the circumstances, she wants to go meet them and see if it's one of the survivors she helped break out. What she finds isn't exactly the result she wanted. The patient is a cardigan, and one look has her calling for security. Bashir's obviously a bit confused by all this, and Kira saying he's a criminal doesn't help much, especially when he tries to leg it. He only gets a few meters before he's stopped by security. Kira wanting him locked up brings protestations of innocence, and Bashir still wants to know what the bloody hell's happening to his patient. For his part, the guy says he's scarpered because of Kira's reaction, and Kira explains that her reaction is because the guy in front of them is a war criminal. His name's Eamon Maritza, and that's a problem. The Bajorans keep lists of cardigans wanted for war crimes, and according to Odo, he's not on them. That's just a technicality for Kira, her saying anybody with the condition he has must have been at the labour camp she helped free, one where some particularly unpleasant shit went down. Sisko thinks hearing what Maritza has to say might be prudent, and without Kira. He's been treated from the sounds of things and says he feels improved. That's a good excuse to ask him how he came to have the condition in the first place, but he says he doesn't. Despite what the captain of the freighter told us, he says he has a similar but distinct condition, treated in the same way but not caused by the labour camp accident. How could it be? He never saw the camp in question, or has even been to Bajor for that matter. He was just an office worker in the military. The occupant of another cell certainly doesn't help Kira's cause. Without even knowing who the cardigan is, he starts shouting for Odo and demands to not be kept in the same place as him. Due process in this matter is going to be a bit of a problem. The situation is starting to develop more wrinkles than an octogenarian's ballsack. Bashir's check of Maritza has shown that he was lying about his medical condition, and it is the one originally told to us by the freighter captain. That places him at the labour camp on a planet he told us he never visited, something confirmed by Bashir's examination of Bajoran medical texts. And Sisko receives a call from a minister on Bajor, too. They found out we're holding someone they suspect is a war criminal, and, after some dancing around, it's made perfectly clear to Sisko that he's expected to deliver Maritza. Threat or no threat, it looks like he intends to do things his way for as long as possible. That's why he seeks out Kira, taking a break on the promenade, and tries to explain to her why he wants Odo handling this. Kira tries to object by saying she was put in charge of it by her government, but her government aren't administrating this station, so until he's replaced, it's his call. Perhaps all this time around politicians is starting to rub off as Kira changes tack. She's fully honest with him about the conflict of interest, but tells him she won't let that interfere with her actions. This is a wound for all of Bajor, so it should be a Bajoran who tends to it for better or worse. The plea works a lot better than confrontation ever would have, and he agrees to let her take charge. Odo's releasing the Bajoran we saw being held earlier, and it sounds like he's well known, too. He's more in favour of justice where cardigans are concerned, at least, as long as it involves a rope, anyway. Odo's been checking on Maritza, and at least some of the things he's said are true. He's been an academy instructor during the last 5 years, for example. I wonder if that timing coincides with the labour camp being overrun. Let's ask the guy himself, shall we? Kira's got questions, the first two being to get him to repeat his lies about his medical condition and never being at the camp. She can prove those are false. Though she was expecting this to shake him, he disappoints her. And he thinks that the truth will be disappointing to her as well. He says he was at the camp, but merely worked on filing records. Quite successfully, in fact, to the point where he was commended for his system by the guy in charge, Gul Dahil, and that's even what he's been teaching at the academy, too. He also denies the proper dodgy shit Kira said went on there, saying the only unpleasantness he saw, save for accidents and the like, was from the inmates against each other. Anything she remembers was deliberately orchestrated to fuel rumours of the place, once spread by Gul Dahil himself to keep people in line. Fear of being brutalised can be as effective as the brutalisation itself, but without the need to clean up afterwards. He's had enough monologuing, it seems, and says it's time for him to be released. A rejection from Kira has him claiming that she cares less about the truth than revenge, and he may have a point. Time to add another wrinkle. Gul Ducat's on the phone and asking why a cardigan traveller is being held. Cisco tries to palm it off as medical treatment, but nobody's buying that. And Ducat is refusing to confirm the identity of Maritza either, saying that his lies about his past aren't a criminal offence and don't warrant such a response. He's also very clear that he'll hold Cisco responsible if anything happens, meaning he's going to upset someone regardless of the result. And things are just as thorny for Kira. The desire to see someone punished is butting up against her sense of right and wrong, something she's trying to work through with a little help from Dax. It would all be so much more black and white if the guy we had was knee-deep in personal blame, rather than just some secretary. Odo's the bearer of bad news on that front. He's checked Bajoran records, and they show an Eamon Maritza was indeed a filing clerk at the camp. And the Academy our guy says he works at confirmed Maritza has taught filing there for years. All that's left is tying the name to the face, something we might be able to do with a photo held by the Bajorans. Slight problem, the guy identified as Maritza in the picture isn't the one we're holding. He does match a different face, though. If this is accurate, we're holding Gul Dahil, the guy in charge of the whole camp. He's fully mask off now, and why not? His work camp was legendary, and all because of his leadership. Why shouldn't he be proud of how smoothly it all ticked over? The torture and the murder was perfectly justified, given the results. You just have to look at how efficient everything was to validate his approach. He was truly at the pinnacle of his profession, an entirely different class to Kira and her little resistance friends. For each of his people they inconvenienced, he was killing hundreds of hers. It's not even worthy of comparison, and nothing she can ever do will change the truth of just how much he proved himself superior to her. Kira's got exactly the monster she wanted, but you know what they say about being careful what you wish for. To hear him admit everything was validating, sure, but it coming with the most derisory dismissal of everything she and her resistance cell did is no less unpleasant as a result. That's odd, says Odo. Why would the leader of a work camp be able to identify members of specific resistance cells? He wasn't in charge of anything to do with subduing such groups, and the knowledge of clandestine organizations isn't something that the leaders of the occupation would just stick in a memo to everyone. It's a good enough question to make her go for another chat with Gul Dahil, while Odo checks to see if anybody's been doing their homework on Major Kira recently. Dahil initially tries to dodge the question of how he knew and attempt to distract her by saying he should already have been taken to Bajor by now. Then he says it was Maritza and his wonderful filing system that brought her to his attention, before again trying to lead her away from the question. That doesn't ring true, though. Him remembering a name from years ago that he saw in passing and about which he had no personal involvement. Odo's had a bit more joy. Despite the growing crowd of labour camp survivors outside his office, brought presumably by the news of Dahil's capture, he's finished those checks. They show someone investigated Kira's history a few months back, and the request came from the planets Dahil travelled here from. Those requests were made under the name Maritza, which makes sense if he was using that identity, but Odo likes to be sure. That's why he wants Bashir to ask for medical data that might help prove who he is once and for all. That's also why he's trying his luck with Gul Ducat, despite him telling Cisco to eat a barrel of dicks earlier. The situation has changed, though, and we're now asking about Gul Dahil rather than just some office worker. The answer to whether we can see records is still no, but Ducat says it wouldn't matter anyway. Dahil's dead, and Ducat himself went to the funeral. News that we have someone here claiming to be him is poorly received. A former high-ranking cardigan being tried and executed on a formerly occupied planet doesn't look good, regardless of whether it's really him. Under the circumstances, Ducat decides letting Odo have a peek at some files is the least worst option. Kira's still with Dahil when Odo comes to tell her we have some developments. The first is Gul Dahil's death certificate. It's from 6 years ago, which gives him the time to have adopted the identity of the filing clerk Maritza and started teaching at the academy 5 years back. So far, so inconclusive. The second is the medical condition he has. According to records, Dahil was on Cardassia at the time of the accident, meaning he couldn't have been affected. Records can be faked, though, still inconclusive. The last is a bit more difficult to explain away. Odo contacted Dahil's home and found he'd resigned from the academy and concluded all of his business there, as though he intended to not return. Then he chose to leave on a vessel coming to Bajoran space, and this station in particular. Kira's still resisting when Bashir arrives. He's got the medical records he wanted, and as well as treatment for the condition, there's something else. Just after he arrived on his new home 5 years back, he started taking another drug, one used to treat your skin after undergoing cosmetic surgery. Kira's heard enough for another chat with Gul Dahil. He becomes far less talkative when she asks about how he was affected by an accident when he was receiving a medal on a different planet at the time, and outright hostile towards her at the mention of a drug used to recover from cosmetic surgery. He's Gul Dahil, he says. Maritza was a snivelling coward, someone who'd regularly be subdued by the screams of tortured Bajorans, but too filled with fear to do anything about it. The words come through tears now, the shame and guilt of his silence in the face of atrocities. He resists Kira opening the cell. He has to be Dahil. All of Cardassia needs him to be Dahil. His people have to face what they did here and be judged for it. The sacrifice is for all of them. Kira listens before telling him that she refuses to kill a man for the crimes of another. Kira's organised travel for Maritza back to his home. She's even got in contact with some people there to help him start over and rebuild the life he concluded before coming here. The death of Gul Dahil might have offered temporary relief to Bajor, but Kira thinks he can do more good as Maritza, someone willing to try and help change the course of his own people. The blade that kills him is held by the Bajoran petty criminal we saw earlier, the one who wanted Maritza lynched. That his victim wasn't really Gul Dahil doesn't matter. They're all the same. He's dragged away by Odo, leaving Kira to perhaps wonder how close she was to the same frame of mind. Until the next adventure. In 2022, a 97-year-old woman, Irmgard Fuchner, who worked as a secretary at Stutthof concentration camp, was found guilty of aiding and abetting in the murder of 11,412 people and the attempted murder of 18 more. It was deemed that her part in filling and filing paperwork directly contributed to their murders, and she received a 2-year suspended sentence. She was 18 years old when it happened, which means most of her education would have been under a revised curriculum that made the teaching of Nazi ideology compulsory. She was literally taught in school that anti-Semitism was normal. If you're wondering what this has to do with a Bajoran work camp, it's worth noting that the Nazis referred to these institutions as labor education camps. If there's one thing fascists tend to understand, it's public relations. Much easier to distract from what your boots are doing if you're wearing a handsome uniform made by Hugo Boss. The question of how much responsibility each cog in a war machine carries is one we've struggled with ourselves. Eamon Maritza was a cog, but that cog helped grind up thousands of lives. You could even argue his contribution was greater than it needed to be by going above and beyond with his filing system. He was commended for it, after all. But how much personal responsibility does he carry for that? Could you call it a willing contribution when the alternative is saying no to murderers? How many Maritzas said no and were never seen again? What about their families, their children? It's a lot easier to take a stand on something when it's all hypothetical. His plan then could be seen as an attempt to speak up in a way that he either couldn't or didn't before, depending on how generously you want to view his past. But would that plan even have had the result he wanted? There's certainly the potential for it to backfire here. The Cardigan government is hardly likely to ignore this, and proving that the person executed wasn't who it was claimed could be used as proof that the Bajorans are inherently disreputable. Gul Dukat said half the planet viewed the body. Proving this trial to be dishonest could instead give those in power the chance to bind Dahil's atrocities to Moritz's deception and more convincingly claim them both as false. Is this really the opening Maritza believes, or could it instead only create even further resentment and antagonism between their peoples? I somewhat doubt the guy who stuck a knife in him would have felt less stabby after a public trial. Perhaps he felt creating the possibility of doubt in a matter already considered settled by most on Cardassia was worth the attempt. Or perhaps it was less about reforming his people than he claimed, and he needed this for his own redemption. To make a really convincing bastard is impressive. To make us care about somebody on the side of the oppressor is impressive as well. To do both for the same character is a level of skill few writers and few actors possess. Darheal is a comic book villain while being entirely convincing. No hint of parody or ham, a wholly invested scumbag filled with the sure and certain belief that he acted in the best interests of his people and that the Bajorans earned their place through weakness. Maritza is a broken man, as much a victim of the system he was in as those for whom he wept. His contrition is such that he was willing to die to heal both sides. Or possibly he thinks doing this will let him experience just one night of uninterrupted sleep before his execution. The character's played by Harris Yulin, and his skill in showing both has caused me to look for other shows in which he's appeared. I can't think of another guest star who's done the same in any show. High praise indeed, though sadly, despite being quite prolific, it looks like he's generally a supporting actor rather than given the lead. If I force myself to look for a complaint, it's perhaps the relative weakness of Tony Rizzoli's performance in comparison to the strength of everybody else present. His contributions come across as wooden when shown against the others on offer, though I do find myself wondering if I would have noticed that as much in pretty much any other episode. Is my judgment here well-founded, or is his only crime being merely fine in an episode where everything else is exemplary? It's nowhere near enough to take the shine off things though, and this episode does truly shine. I've always held that Trek is often at its best when it gets down in the dirt and shows us that pure black and white only ever exists on paper. The bravery in aiming to tackle something so difficult, and from an angle so potentially controversial, would be worthy of applause even if they hadn't pulled it off. That they managed to make one of the most memorable stories Trek's ever seen in the process is just the cherry. End of episode.
What did she say then, this lawyer that's been assigned to us?
Are we doing this again? You were right here.
Come on, you know how this works.
Fine. Sigh. She said that, as we are technically the first members of our species here, we have a good case for arguing anything that went wrong was a first contact oopsie.
What an happy turn of events, and one that may soon see us freed from these damnable holding cells.
She also mentioned, purely in passing, that the Federation or Bajorans wouldn't know the difference if we were to say leaving turds all over the floor was our way of greeting new species.
Which is close enough to the truth as to be true. This is the only official first contact situation we've ever had, so statistically turd gifts have occurred at 100% of these events. And that explains little Cecily too.
You've named it.
Of course I've named it. This lad's going in Cisco's office like the baseball and the clock. Anything else would be an insult to our diplomatic delegation. Woof.